MedCram.com.
Welcome to another MedCram update. A lot of you have asked questions about a video that we just did on a randomized controlled trial that was just published using LED lights, specifically near-infrared LED lights, in the treatment of hospitalized COVID-19. It was this video here. Specifically, it was regarding this paper that was published in the Journal of Photochemistry and Photobiology, one of the top 5% of journals available. So just to review real quickly, this was a LED vest that they used. It was at 940 nanometers, and it was about 300 infrared LEDs. Each one was 0.02 of a watt. Total optical power of this vest was 6 watts. And the average power density over a square centimeter was 29 10,000ths of a watt. So pretty low level. And the vest size was 2,088 square centimeters. And what they did was a prospective, descriptive, single-blinded, randomized longitudinal trial where they took 30 inpatients between the age of 50 to 80 with COVID-19 diagnosis, non-obese. In one group, they put the jacket on, turned it on for 15 minutes a day, plus conventional therapy. In the other group, they just put the jacket on the patient, but left it turned off and did conventional treatment. Let's look at the results again. We can go back to the original video, but briefly here. You can see that here on this side, this is the treatment group, and over here is the placebo group. And you can see the oxygen flow intake started off at 3 and went down to 0.3 liters per minute, so there was a reduction. Here in the control group, it went from 5.4 down to 1.3. They still had a higher amount of oxygen at the end of that treatment. But look at the partial oxygen saturation. It went from 86 in the treatment and 89 in the placebo to 96 in the treatment and just 91.9 in the placebo, and that was statistically significant. Tidal volume, which is the amount of air that you can breathe in, went from 320 in the treatment group, 297 in the placebo group, up to as high as 394 in the treatment and only 319 in the placebo. That was statistically significant. The maximum inspiratory pressure, which is the amount of pressure that you can generate when you're pulling in, is a good indication that you're going to be able to breathe on your own. You can see here that in the treatment group, they started off at negative 52.7 and negative 48.7 in the baseline, going to a negative 77 in the treatment, and without much improvement there in the placebo. In terms of hematological analysis, one of the things that we always see with these patients that come in with COVID-19 is they have an elevated white count, which is not unusual. And as they get better, that white count tends to come down. We can see here in the treatment group, they started off at 10.9, and in the placebo group, they started off at 9. There was really no decrement in the white blood cells in the placebo group, yet in the treatment group, they went down to 7,000 or 7.4. That was statistically significant. And then the lymphocytes, which we universally see in these patients that are low, these are the cells that are responsible for taking care of the virus-infected cells. So it's important to have good lymphocyte counts. And you can see here, it started off pretty low at 950, 890. And we can see here in the treatment group, it doubled. Whereas in the placebo group, it really didn't change that much. So really exciting findings, and this was a randomized controlled trial, so it eliminates a lot of the confounders that we see. But this was 30 subjects in a study. The fact that they were able to see statistical significance with just 30 subjects means that this is a pretty powerful effect that we're seeing. But it would be nice to see this repeated and also be a multi-center trial, because we don't know if it was something about this population that was maybe the most susceptible to having this. So there's a lot of questions that we had, and I picked out 6 of the most common questions that I've received. Number 1, where can I buy this jacket? Number 2, can't I just take melatonin? And we'll talk a little bit more about why melatonin is involved here. Number 3, is getting out into the sun the same? Number 4, what about those of us that live where it's too dark or it's dark a lot of the time? 5, does it matter that it was 940 nanometers? That was the wavelength specifically that they emitted. And 6, is this really a thing? Why is this becoming an issue now? So let's start with the first question. Where can I buy this jacket? The first thing I ought to know is that the researchers in the study built this jacket. It's not available to purchase. That doesn't mean that some enterprising organization is working on this, but this study was specifically designed by the investigators, and they built this jacket. Some of these patients that they're taking care of in the hospital, they're too sick to leave the hospital. None of these patients were intubated, but a number of times you have them hooked up to high amounts of oxygen, and that oxygen is available only inside. If you were to take them outside, they would become quickly hypoxic, and they have to be looked after. So sometimes the best way of taking care of patients that are that sick is to bring the treatment to them, because it's sometimes difficult to get them out. But no, you cannot buy this jacket. But we'll talk about some alternatives that may be just as good or even better. And one of the things that you've got to understand is the solar radiation spectrum. Here we have ultraviolet light, here we have visible light, and here we have infrared light. You cannot see infrared light. So when you talk about red light therapy, that is not what we're talking about here. The type of light that we're talking about is not seen, it is felt. It is that warmth that you get from the sun. And you can see here that this is the sunlight at the top of the atmosphere, and then the red here is the radiation from the sun at sea level. 940 nanometers is right smack dab here in the infrared spectrum, and you can see here that there is plenty of that to receive from the sun. They came up with 940 nanometers kind of out of the blue. They don't describe why they picked 940 nanometers. There's a lot of other ones at 800 and 700, etc. I would love to know why they picked 940. Interestingly, you can see here that there is a water absorption. So the water molecule, which looks like this, has a bond between two hydrogens, and actually, as it turns out, these bonds can absorb certain wavelengths of light, and one of the wavelengths is right around there at 940 nanometers. So there's a lot of water in the atmosphere, and as the sun comes in, that water is absorbing at that frequency, and that's why we see a relative declination of light. But even so, there's still quite a bit of 940 nanometer, and of course, the higher up you go in elevation, the more of that you're going to see. So that's something to know regarding that. The next question was, why can't I just take melatonin and be done with it? Let's take a look at that. This is the slide that we put up, and central to this is reactive oxygen species. So reactive oxygen species are not always bad, but in this case, when you have too much of it, that's a bad thing. And so what you need is a balance. And in this case, melatonin, which is one of the most potent antioxidants, it's even more potent than glutathione. It actually regulates the glutathione system. As we can see here, that melatonin is an extremely powerful antioxidant. If you were to ingest it, couldn't it just take care of it itself without you having the jacket? The thing about melatonin is that not only is it a powerful antioxidant, it's also a potent stimulator of the circadian rhythm. It's a signal to the body that it's time to go to sleep. So if you're ingesting melatonin at times other than before you're going to go to bed, it's going to confuse your circadian rhythm, and you don't want to confuse your circadian rhythm. Furthermore, if you take melatonin, generally speaking, the recommended dosage is about 1 to 3 milligrams before you go to bed to help with sleep. If you go much more than 3 milligrams of melatonin, it's going to cause issues with, paradoxically, not being able to sleep or feeling irritated. So don't take too much melatonin. Taking oral ingested melatonin means that it's going to get into your circulation system and it's going to go throughout. The melatonin being hypothesized as being produced from near-infrared radiation is actually subcellular in the mitochondria itself. It doesn't get out into the circulation. It's not signaling your circadian rhythm that it's time for sleep. It's a different type of distribution of that melatonin. The other thing I'd also mention is that at least in the United States and in many other countries, although not all, melatonin is not a regulated substance. It's a nutritional substance. And as such, it is not governed by the FDA. And therefore, manufacturers can put anything they want into those capsules that they call melatonin, but there's no one actually checking this. There are third-party laboratory testing facilities that can actually test that. And what I would recommend, if you are going to get supplemental melatonin, make sure it's being tested by a third party to validate the fact that there's actually melatonin in those capsules. Since we're on this slide, I'll just make a mention here that melatonin can also be gotten naturally from the pineal gland. And that's going to happen only if you're not exposing your eyes to bright light at night. So it's important to get those lights off and get to bed. All right, next question. Is getting out into the sun the same? And I would say yes, and I'll show you why. Here, the jackets were producing a monochromatic light, so that means just in this wavelength at 940, and it was pretty low-level energy. When you go out into the sun, you are getting this whole package. And so as a result, you're getting ultraviolet light that is going to give you vitamin D, specifically ultraviolet B radiation. You're getting visible light that's going to help you with vision. It's also been shown to improve your mood with stimulation of the perihabenular nucleus. And that's why people who live in northern latitudes in winter will get seasonal affective disorder, which is sort of like a depression. So you're going to get that. It's also going to give you a huge bolus of infrared light. This infrared light represents 53% of the total energy from the sun. So not only are you getting 940 nanometers, you're getting everything else that comes with it. And we don't know if 940 nanometers is the optimal wavelength. We do know that if you go out into the sun, you're going to be getting the optimal wavelength because sunlight, as you can see here, includes all of those wavelengths. The other thing that I'll mention as well is you do not need to be in direct sun exposure to get near-infrared radiation. In fact, if you are around a lot of green vegetation, green leaves, those leaves reflect more in the near-infrared spectrum, which is right there. Being outside in the sight of a lot of trees and greenery is actually going to give you even more near-infrared than if you're in direct sunlight. Near-infrared radiation penetrates through clothes. It penetrates through sunscreen. It penetrates through your hat. So if you are concerned about getting too much sun exposure, if you are concerned about the effects on your skin, whether it's melanoma or basal cell carcinoma or squamous cell carcinoma or what they call actinic keratoses, which is sun damage, please feel free to put on clothes as much as you need to get protection from that. Usually just a single layer is enough. But realize that near-infrared radiation will go right through that and is not damaging of the skin. Ultraviolet is the type of light that damages the skin. Near-infrared does not damage skin, and it goes deep down, and it can cause the effects that we're hoping to see here in these patients. So I talked to Scott Zimmerman, who was one of the authors looking at melatonin and light exposure. Here's what he estimated the dose in joules would be from near-infrared radiation and the visible spectrum. So we can see here whole body NIR, about 20 minutes. You can see here plenty of visual light and plenty of near-infrared radiation in the dose of about 6,000 joules. You're on the beach for an hour, we're talking about the same. Plenty of blue, which is visible light here in this case, and orange, which is near-infrared radiation. Taking a siesta outside, just sort of sleeping, maybe under a tree, a little bit less visible light. And I say siesta here because your eyes are closed, so there's going to be less visible light coming through. There is still some, but you're still getting a tremendous amount of near-infrared radiation because it's able to penetrate through your eyelids. It's able to penetrate through your skin. So you're able to get quite a bit. If you are getting near-infrared radiation during the day for about an hour, you can see you're still getting quite a bit, especially with activity. In the evening, for about an hour, it's a little bit less because if you're outside, the sun is a little bit lower in the sky, and obviously you're going to have less visible light in the evening. What about the vest? This is how much the vest is giving in the 15 minutes that it was given during the study. So you can see here, if you want to get the benefits of the vest in 15 minutes, how much should you be outside? And it looks as though we're talking maybe about an hour. LED lighting inside your house. So this is a different type of LED lighting for about an hour. It's going to give you some visible light, but absolutely no near-infrared radiation. And again, remember that the windows that you have in your house is also going to determine how much near-infrared radiation you get. Newer windows, less near-infrared light. And what about at a campfire? So I like to have a fire in my house. I live at about 4,700 feet. And as a result of that, I'm able to have a fireplace where I live here in California and a wood-burning stove. And I like to sit in front of that a safe distance away. How much am I getting after sitting there for an hour? It's not a lot, but it's some. So I hope this gives you an idea about how much energy these things are relatively giving you. Okay, number 4, what about those of us that live where it is dark a lot of the time? Because the sun comes up in the east and sets in the west, it's going to have to cut through a lot of atmosphere at the edges because it's slicing through it at an angle. And as a result of that, ultraviolet light is not going to be coming through very well when the sun is low in the sky, no matter where it is, because ultraviolet light cannot penetrate very well through the atmosphere. That is very different when it comes to near-infrared radiation. Near-infrared radiation, while it is hampered slightly by cutting through the atmosphere, it can go through it pretty well. So even when the sun is low in the sky, even if you're living in Northern Europe, even if you're living in Canada, and the sun is coming up, but it's not coming up very high, and it's in the dead of winter, can you actually get a benefit from that sunlight? Yes. Getting outside and having the least amount of barrier to that sun as possible is one of the things that you can do to make sure you're getting near-infrared radiation. However, I understand that if it's minus 20 degrees, that's not going to be the optimal situation. So sometimes what you can do if you're in those kind of extreme environments is to build solariums or greenhouses that are specifically constructed with regular glass, not the type of glass that blocks the near infrared radiation. So typically greenhouses are explicitly designed in a way that it does not reduce that important near infrared radiation from the sun. So if you have one of those, that would be something where you could get into one of those potentially and not miss out on the benefit of the near infrared radiation, and also not be exposed to really, really cold temperatures. But again, if that's the situation, then likely a lot of times in those type of places, you're allowed to build fires and sit in front of those. And that is a way of getting near infrared radiation. So number 5, does it matter that it's at 940 nanometers? No, this is the wavelength that they chose. Again, I would love to know why they chose this. It is in the near infrared spectrum. Again, it's right there. If you get out into the sun, you're going to be guaranteed to be getting 940 nanometers. So just for clarity, I wanted to show you what the typical emission spectrum is for a hydrocarbon fire. So we're talking about burning wood or fuel or anything like that. And you can see here, here's the 940 nanometers, and it's pretty good. I mean, in terms of a fire, you're going to be getting pretty good exposure to 940 if you're building a fire. And for those of you who are physicists, there's something called black body radiation. Anything that's hot, it's going to emit frequencies that are going to be consistent with black body radiation. And 940 in the near infrared is certainly going to be well represented in that case. And the last thing for this video is this really a thing? I mean, is this just sort of a one-off kind of crazy randomized controlled trial, or is there actually some other data behind this? And for those of you who are asking this question, go back and look at our video and you'll see what the biochemical data is. But let me just give you some epidemiological data that I think is pretty cool. This is a study that was published back in 2019 in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism. And it was a really interesting study because they looked at 13,000 people aged anywhere from 30 to 65. And it was done primarily in 2 different cities. One was in Oxfordshire, UK, so at Oxford essentially. And the other one was done in the Netherlands in Leiden. The predication of this study is actually pretty simple. They drew fasting, metabolic, and lipid markers on certain days throughout the year. And they looked back at the weather forecast for these places on everybody's date that the blood was drawn. And they looked at the previous 7 days and asked the question, how much was the sun out and what was the temperature? And they wanted to know, just in those 7 days, did temperature, did sunlight, did these sort of things actually affect the metabolic profile of these patients? And so they drew it and they looked at the data using all of the different regression models and assessing. And what they found out was fascinating. They could actually draw a correlation between the number of days out of 7 that the sun was out and shining and their glucose metabolism, their ability to metabolize triglycerides and triglyceride level, and also cholesterol levels. So in other words, just in 7 days, that would have had an effect, depending on how much sunlight they got, to what kind of laboratory tests they actually got. You can see here the title of that paper, and this was the conclusion that they came up with at the end. They said bright sunlight, but not outdoor temperature, might be associated with increased insulin sensitivity and lower triglyceride levels. And if you think about that, it makes sense because all of those are metabolic factors that have to do with oxidative stress. Well, we don't have time to talk about all of the other studies that show that being outdoors improves metabolic health and your overall health optimization. But I hope that this video has cleared up some of the questions that a lot of you have had and made you excited, just like me, about getting outside, getting exposure, even if it's not direct sunlight, at least getting outside and getting some of that near infrared radiation. Thanks for joining us.